As far as I can determine, 1976. He's published 3 books on very involved mathematics. I finally was able to hold in my hands 2 of those 3 books. I found them very recently at the Institute of Advanced Studies Library in Princeton. Never been able to find them anywhere else, but no history of Levinson himself. And he developed what was even more important, the so-called Levinson time equations. With that as a background, they were able then to go on and develop the whole system of the visibility project as applied to a large hard object. Now in 1940, as I said, the test was successful. The Navy then decided they would go full bore, finance the thing with unlimited funds, and classify the project, of course. And we were part of it. Well, in 1941, the project was going on, and of course Tesla had full-bore enthusiasm from the Navy, and they had full confidence from the President and everybody else to go ahead. While we were at sea, because they decided the 2 of us needed some sea duty, so we spent a year, 1941, at sea, in the USS Pennsylvania, as I remember, which toured the Pacific. It came back to Pearl Harbor for some repairs and dry docking in October of 41. We took some leave. We went to San Francisco. The 5th of December, we were about to board the plane back to Pearl when we were stopped by the captain who was just getting on the plane. He said, "Gentlemen, your orders are canceled. Come with me." So we went Vice Admiral Hal Bowen Sr., who was the then director of the Office of Naval Engineering, which was abolished in 46, but he was in charge of all of the research work for the Navy. And he told us, "Gentlemen, you may as well know we will be at war with Japan within 48 to 72 hours. We expect to lift Pearl Harbor. You're not going back there. You're too valuable. So we're going to leave you in San Francisco until your tour is over, which is the home base for the Pennsylvania. You do office work. You can enjoy some lead times. As you might as well enjoy it. The Pennsylvania. You do office work. You can enjoy some lead times. As you might as well enjoy it, because when you go back to the Institute, there'll be no leaves and there'll be nothing but hard work." So we did. January 42, we went back to the Institute and remained there through the whole series of tests and the whole project. In the meantime, Tesla was given a ship for his full-size tests with crew. And that happened to be a battleship, unknown. But in wartime, apparently, politics has a bit of pull, and the politics coming from the President of the United States, he could probably order the Secretary of the Navy to supply any kind of ship that Tesla wanted. So he got a battleship. The equipment was designed, of course, by Tesla with a lot of work and cooperation, and you might say also a lot of fighting between Tesla and Van Neumann. Tesla was director, Van Neumann was, I guess, assistant. They didn't agree on everything. Van Neumann had a great deal of respect for Tesla's ability, but they didn't agree about everything. Tesla was insisting, as the date approached for the tests on the battleship with personnel, that they were going to have a very severe problem with personnel. He said flatly, he says, "You cannot employ the large amounts of power required to make a ship of this size invisible without having a very disastrous effect on the heads of the people, or the minds, or the bodies of the personnel involved, because they're talking megawatts of RF power, enormous amounts of power in the coils, which in the early phases were like degaussing coils, were wrapped around the hull of the ship, but the later design was a set of 4 coils mounted on the deck of the ship, specially designed Tesla conical-shaped designs. And just interestingly enough, every transformer design ever built by Nikola Tesla was conical. It was not round core. It was conically shaped, tapering towards a point at the top. Well, he knew he had a problem, Tesla. He went to the Navy, asked for more time. They wouldn't give him more time. And he says, "You have a deadline." And he had already been advised, and here we have to backtrack a little bit into the history of Tesla. By his own statements to the press in 1900 in Colorado Springs, he said he was in contact with intelligences from off the planet Earth, very coolly received by his scientific colleagues. He made the same announcement to the press in 1923 at the time of the Mars approach, the close approach in 23, and he made another announcement after that. And according to 2 people I know personally who worked with Tesla in the period in the late 30s and the early 40s, he had a great deal of RF equipment in his New York labs. He had 2 of them, actually. His residence at the Hotel New Yorker and the receiving station there. And he also had lab offices and the lab operation and the top towers and the top floor of the Waldorf Astoria, and those transmitters were located there. At least one of these two people said he was in contact with somebody off planet Neil. I didn't understand the equipment. He says, I know he was. The inference here, and the data I have, is that he was in contact with the outside, and he was getting information which said, you've got a very serious problem. You've got to solve it or you're going to lose people. They'll be dead. And so he went, based on this, to the Navy. The Navy would not give him additional time. He says, I know how to solve the problem, but he says, I need more time to design new equipment. The Navy says, there's a war on. You can just make it work. Don't change anything. Make it work. You got a deadline. So he took the only way out he knew. And that was to sabotage the project for the test which came up in March 42. So we just detuned the equipment so when the switches were thrown, nothing worked. I mean, the transmitters lit, the tubes came alive, and power was consumed, but nothing worked. No field effects, no invisibility. So he says, well, gentlemen, I guess I goofed, and it's time to leave. You have a very good man here who can take over the project, Dr. Ben Neumann. I'm leaving. Bye. It's debatable whether he left or was fired, or whether they said, you were fired, and he said, you can't fire me, I quit. In any case, he left. And that was the end of Tesla insofar as that project was concerned.
What year was that?
That was 1942, March. Van Neumann took over and he looked at everything. He said to the Navy, he says, I've got to make a study of this. It obviously failed. He says, I don't know what's wrong, but I'll find out. He says, I need time. And the Navy couldn't say anything. He said, give him the time. So he went ahead. We were working with him at that time. We were back and forth between the Philadelphia Navy Yard office and of course, the Institute. I don't know where we spent more time, probably at the Institute. So Van Neumann made his own study of it and decided to change things around, and they still had the two generators that he proposed to use. In the meantime, he didn't have the battleship. There was a ship of the line that went back in service. It did not have a special crew. It had the regular crew. And they finally decided, he, of course, talking through us to the Navy brass, we needed a special ship. It would be outfitted from the ground up. So it was decided to pick one that was going to come down the ways, and we decided on DE-173, which later was named the Eldridge. And about July of 42, they were laying the keel, and it was designed, the design was modified so they could put in two huge generators. And the reason why they had to design the equipment to the ship was the fact that the destroyer Escort is not a very large ship. It's about 1,500 tons. Roughly equipped. The later figure said 1,900 dry weight. There's agreement between both the Greek records and the American records of 1,240 tons dry. So not a small destroyer. It only had two gun turrets. So to fit two huge generators and the motor drive system and all the RF equipment and the four transmitters on this thing, it took a lot of design effort, actually, from the beginning to know where you're going to fit the stuff. You don't throw it on this ship in midstream after it's built. So October came down the ways and they wanted to dry dock. They put equipment on board, and before they did this, they decided they needed a special test crew. Selected about 33 people, all volunteers, trained them up at Groveland, Connecticut from about September to December of 42, and they graduated, and the picture still exists of the graduation class. And who was the head of the class but our father? This picture there with the naval uniform and the cap and scrambled eggs and the whole bit. Still don't know how he got involved in this, but he could have transferred between the Navy and the Coast Guard because there is a letter of citation still on the records which Duncan